Good day to all who are seeing this video and participating in Jawahar Sir Class Presents Youth Talks. I am Dr. Jawahar Surisetti, and with me is Jagrit, visiting scholar of AI and ML in Purdue University. Hello, Jagrit.
Hi.
Okay, so since you have a background of India and have also some exposure of the education system in US, and that too in the COVID situation. So what is it that you find is different that we are doing and they are not doing, or vice versa?
I think the biggest difference, like the difference that works in favor of, say, the United States first, is that there is a lot of emphasis on free access. So some things, some very normal things like going to buildings, using university resources. What I have noticed is when you are in an Indian university, what tends to happen is you need to go through a whole array of permissions and administrative logistics. Whereas if you are in a US public university, say, it is all accessible to you immediately. So it's a great thing when the answer to any question that you are about to have about a university resource is yes rather than no. And I think that access and availability of resources is something that I have noticed is really high in US universities. In favor of the Indian universities, the one thing that works really well is the idea of cultural unity. So in the sense, the university treats all of its students as a single being. It's like a single organism, which is not necessarily that free. But what that also ensures is that people, in a sense, do fall in line when it's required. So things like when you look at COVID as a pandemic, the ability of universities to mobilize its students and take action fast is really, really in favor of Indian universities as compared to the US, where it takes a lot of time for people to settle down in the first place.
Okay. So let's come back to the school education. So the schools are look to be in trouble. A lot of online classes going on for the children. And there is also a resource crunch in the parents. So they are fighting for no fees if there is no school physically. Even if online is happening, it doesn't matter. So in such a situation, what do you think changes once the schools open?
Interesting question, especially because the way we look at education has been very stagnated from almost the past century. And so all of a sudden, this brings in a lot of new possibilities to consider. And so things like not having to accommodate students, for example, if you look at colleges, you have always associated accommodation as a part of tuition. Right? And so this new paradigm where the requirements have shifted online, the education has shifted online, and therefore the entire chain has become different, brings about a very new way of looking at the way education system functions, which we might not be used to. And therefore it is only natural to consider this being both a shocking change, but a possibility of a new future that can come in that can be ushered in for the coming times. So for example, say in school education, one very important thing that has been a resource constraint for schools is the availability of teacher to student ratio. And so now when it has turned online, the possibility of things making logistical sense in terms of each teacher being able to pay attention to each student has become accessible now. On top of that, there are things that have become more accessible, like access to better education, even if you are not in well-connected cities or well-connected locations geographically. So for a student, say, living in Raipur or a city in Chhattisgarh, it becomes very difficult to access quality education because it is restrained by the geographical boundaries and resources. And so now a possibility has come up because of things like COVID, which has unlocked and shown to the world that it is possible to have online education be the primary source of education. And so I think it does make a major difference while also opening a lot of possibilities for the future.
But how do you face this challenge with the physical distancing norms that have come up? That if in a class of 40, which is generally the class of an Indian school, children have to be eliminated to accommodate them for maintaining the physical distancing. So how do you find ways to do
it? I'm sorry, I did not get the question.
So see, there are 20 classrooms in a school, assuming, and each class has 40 children. With the physical distancing norms, only 20 can be accommodated. So where do they get the infrastructure?
Right. I think this is where the possibilities of online education come in. Because what happens is, for a lot of, even in the US educational system, what happens is a lot of schools have some section of their students study online in what is known as online public and online private schools. And so even if there is a requirement, because physical constraints are always limiting, we can always extend the same level of education to a lot more students by making them go online. So in my opinion, online is going to play a very, very major role in the future of education going forward.
Okay. But are you also sure that the Indian parent is going to consider online as equivalent to the physical going to school?
I think it is a matter of when rather than if. I mean, the importance that education, the importance that internet has taken in the lives of all Indian people has also exponentially grown if you look at times before this. And so the acceptability of any such format is just a matter of when it becomes prominent. And so as pandemics like COVID come in, these situations are going to play a huge role in showing, especially a nation like India, that it is possible to make that happen while also getting the benefit of all the resources that internet avails to you.
Now, coming away from the classroom, some questions which are relevant in the college scenarios, maybe school scenarios also. So, are we looking at people when we go back to schools or colleges with a lot of mistrust, saying that he may be carrying the virus? Will this affect friendships?
I think a huge social backlash is waiting for us when we when we revert back to the physical system of schooling or college education, especially because there are a lot of fears, a new sort of fears that have come in people. So things like my not washing hands for say a few hours was a normal thing for a lot of people, but now it has become a matter of fear. Right, communicating at really close distances is something that was considered a norm. I mean, it's almost like if you're a close friend, you need to be physically close.
Yeah.
Right. But as this pandemic has shown, a new wave of fear has cropped up, which could lead to a lot of social changes. For example, the way we look at club activities in colleges, what tends to happen is people group together, they share food. That's how all of these activities are made currently. But it is totally possible that post-COVID, when we revert back to our original systems, all of these systems change to become something like a rationing for each and every member of the club, etc.
Okay. No, and I think in good humor, the spoons getting longer, but the plate remaining the same could be a solution. Could be a solution. If you really, anyway. But what happens to the boyfriend, girlfriend, the affairs in college campuses? If physical distance is maintained, there are no hugs. What happens?
I think it's a blessing in disguise for college administration because every single time they have tried to enforce something like a PDL law, what comes in between is human rights. Now they have got the shield of having COVID and the spreading.
Okay, easy for them to administer love and lovebirds. Okay. So now again, in a situation where the political masters in both US and India there is a change or difference in perception of the people. While the Prime Minister of India comes across as a very strong administrator, and his word is taken as a rule and followed by a majority. There might be naysayers, but it's followed by a majority. Whereas the President of the US, we've seen a lot of protests, etc., on the roads and people not maintaining what is supposed to be maintained. So, how do you change? How do you see both the leaders?
I think the way that a population perceives its leaders has got to do a lot with the nature of the population itself. India is majorly a conservative thought process sort of a nation. So a lot of people, we don't have a problem with, we don't have a problem with abiding by rules. We don't have a problem with limiting the kind of freedom that we get, all in the purpose of serving the nation. We are used to that idea. And therefore, in the previous times as well, whenever the nation has required us to mobilize the population, it has been an easy task for the leader to do. Whereas if you look at the United States, it is majorly a postmodern liberal sort of a nation. The population in its entirety is like that. And therefore, irrespective of whether it is for the service of the nation or if the leader says so, it is a difficult idea for the population to think that their freedom is being impeded upon in any way. And this, I think, reflects a lot in the way their leaders are perceived. Because irrespective of whether the leaders are taking a strong action for the favor of the nation or whether it's polarizing, in a lot of sense, it depends on how the population thinks of the decisions that they have made.
Okay. So, does this stem from the fact that we are used to listening to our parents more than our Western counterparts, and so this mirrors what is happening in the larger interests of the society?
Absolutely. In fact, this can be looked even further. If you look back in the history and the myths of each of these countries, you'll also find that the concept of trust and elders and respecting, all of this is very strongly entrenched in the Indian subculture. Whereas if you look at United States and its history, what has happened is each individual has come up by caring for themselves, in the sense that there is not a very strong sense of community, but the community comes from caring for self. Right? And that is the reason, in a sense, that is the major reason behind why these cultures have come up these way.
Okay, but is it not contrary to what you are saying that Bill Gates and Warren Buffett are have donated their wealth to the extent that nobody has done in the world, and we don't see their Indian counterparts doing it?
Absolutely. But the idea is not of infringing on freedom is where I'm coming at. So when Bill Gates and Warren Buffett do it, there are two things to it. Number one, they are doing it of their own volition, which means to say that it is not against their freedom. And the second thing is that it is only natural because these names that you are taking come from a country which is any which is a major part of the economy of the world. So if the companies that they own make a major share of the money, it is a little stronger in the sense that their philanthropy is going to be more in the limelight. So that is another part of it. So there are philanthropists in India as well, even though it might not be a very strongly entrenched part of the corporate structure of India. But it's just that the economy is also a little smaller in terms of.
No, because what you are saying, that if Bill Gates and Warren Buffett are two of the richest people that we have, but absolutely, in the top in India, if we see, philanthropy is not entrenched in many groups except for maybe Wipro, Tata, and Infosys, which are not right at the top. Yes. So is it something to do with the personality of the people who lead these, or is it something else?
We have always looked at being people who can be told what to do. In the sense that, I mean, this might be a little controversial in that sense, but we have always felt a little more comfortable in knowing what to do. So we are a little less, we are a little less risk taking community as a whole. And therefore, what we look at is what can we do as a corporate, as a company, to deal with the problems that we have first. And therefore, if you look at it, this is also part of the way we deal with things at home. We look to solve the problems of our limited ecosystem. So I solve for the problems of myself, not my neighbors, right? Now, even though this does not I mean, what I mentioned earlier was that it is a matter of looking at freedom versus problems. So when I mentioned the people of United States looking more towards themselves, I meant it as their freedoms. And so the idea of whether my freedom has to be maintained, even if someone else's freedom is not maintained, is stronger in the United States.
Okay.
Whereas in this case, this is more like problem solving for individuals.
Okay. How much online is good in a day for children in schools?
The general population as of now spends around 7 hours online just on their smartphones. Now, given this scenario, if we look at in isolation the usage of internet and electronic devices for education only, then it could be combined with the average attention span to be around 3 to 4 hours at max per day. But this is assuming that this is in isolation, because there are a lot of other use cases and applications that children do on electronic devices.
That's okay. So online school should be 3 to 4 hours maximum.
Yes.
Okay. And the other thing is that if this is the case, then how do you feel should be the assessment happening in the schools when everything is online? The monitoring of the teacher has reduced from his or her physical self to an online platform, where even if he says something, the student might leave or mute the device. So how do you assess?
I think if you want to consider assessment, you need to take one step back in terms of how the entire course structure will have to change. Majorly because even if you look at a 3 to 4 hour time period, which is again shrunk up as compared to the 6 to 7 hours that teachers directly get, it needs a drastic change in, number one, what we teach, and then secondly of how we assess it. So when we look at how the things that we teach has to be changed, if we are looking at online, a lot of that dependence has to come on the student himself or herself, as compared to the current way of teaching, where a lot of that responsibility is on the teacher. Right? Okay. So you'll have to look at ways in which you deliver content so that the students can do stuff on their own. And considering this, the assessment will have to become something which incorporates a question answer type, where there is not necessarily a definite right answer.
Okay.
Right. So the current way in which we look is that we have answer keys. Right? That way is not going to be possible, in my opinion, for online learning.
Okay. Again, then that means that music, drama, physical education, and all these are going to suffer?
Yes, there are some subjects that are inherently, by the nature of which we have access to the internet, face some concerns with the advent of online education, because you can't do things like practical lab experiments online. The second thing is things like physical education cannot be done online, and therefore there are some subjects that are obviously going to suffer simply because of the way we access this technology, right? And so if we look at, we'll have to consider alternative ways for assessment for each of these subjects too.
Okay. teachers, and I am talking generally from a perspective not just of this COVID-19, but generally. So in your college education, in your school education, what have you found that teachers are not doing right, and what do you think they should do to make it right in future?
I think this is the major thing that I believe is requiring change is that currently, especially in India, we follow what is known as the banking system of education, where the teachers deposit information and the students are the ones that the information is deposited in.
Withdraw.
And so this is merely a one-way communication sort of a system, where there are limited chances for students wherein they can ask questions. And I think we are moving in the direction of change, but what is happening right now is that this change is coming from trying to making the class interactive. But the problem is the way in which our content is structured. So things like our resources, the way the books are structured, the way the course curriculums are structured, they are inherently based on this banking system. And so even if you ask students to be like, yeah, you can ask questions to me anytime, you can stop me anytime, even if the teacher makes that effort, it will not be fully functional as long as this resources, as long as the content, as long as the style in which this education happens changes. And I think the major change that teachers will need to bring in is to take a little more, collaborative, wherein they consider students as people who are trying to solve a problem, who are trying to chord a concept together with the teacher, rather than the teacher being someone who already knows the answer and telling the students or guiding the students in reaching.
To reach that answer.
Yes.
Okay. So, one last question here. There is a problem now with the 12th standard, final year of graduation students who are just about to take off in their careers or jobs. So there is a stress that companies have withdrawn the appointment letters they have given or postponed it or cancelled it. And admissions to colleges, etc., are in a limbo. Yes. We don't know when this will normalize. So seeing this, first question is, do residential colleges face a challenge because parents don't want to send their children to residences where they are not in control of the health of the child? That is one. And second is, do you feel that this stress of uncertainty is going to take a toll on these young people?
These are, in fact, very important considerations for the youth today. The first one about residential colleges. If you can, the biggest stress in terms of residential colleges and the impact that this is having can be very clearly seen in the interim batches that have faced suspended education because of this pandemic. So, for example, when I am pursuing my fellowship right now, a one-year fellowship, which because of the pandemic had to shift to online education halfway, right? But the way every single calculation of every institution has been set up is already incorporated the idea of having accommodation as a part of the fee, as I mentioned before.
Yes.
And so everyone is in a flux because the students are trying to understand, if I am accommodating myself, then what is the role of the accommodation that, say, the course is providing? Yes. The parents are in an influx where they are trying to understand, why am I paying the residential fee? The colleges or the schools who have developed their courses to function as residential courses, they are not just there as just a logistical thing. They are structured in such a way that it makes sense to have them being residential. And so they are trying to figure out how exactly can we restructure these courses which are meant to be residential in nature, right? So I think one thing that is going to happen in the future is that a lot of these courses are going to be tailor-made so that they can be fit for the online medium. So right now, online is just a way to augment the way we reach it. Or for most of these residential courses, it is more like a last resort. That because we don't have any other way of communicating, we'll use the online medium. But I think a lot of the courses to come in the future are going to be structured in such a way that it only makes sense to have them online, just like the way residential courses are going to have. The second part about the stress that this brings, like the hiring freezes and the situation of the economy right now brings on students. I think it's a repercussion of the situation that we are in. And it is only natural to feel stressed because we are venturing into an unknown place, because we don't know exactly how the system is going to turn out after the pandemic. But one thing that I believe is almost the silver lining for this entire pandemic is that it has made it a lot more comforting to take risks. So, for example, if a student wants to try something unconventional, for example, like playing music, right, or taking music as a career or taking sports as a career, because of this, it has become a lot more comforting or a lot more possible for students to take risk and venture into new domains, because now everything is as uncertain.
Yeah. So thank you very much. Let's and best of luck for your future endeavors.